Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So glad to have you joining us today for our workshop with Tom Rockwell from the Exploratorium in San Francisco. Tom will introduce you officially in just a moment, and I will immediately introduce Elif Goxgem to say a few words. But before I do so, I want to start our program as we do with all of our programs with a land acknowledgement. I am in New York City right now, and we acknowledge that New York City is located in the ancestral Lenape homelands, and we recognize the longstanding significance of these lands for Lenape peoples, past and present. And Elif, I know that you are in Washington, D.C., which resides on the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Anacostan peoples, and also neighbors the ancestral lands of the Picatque and Pamunkey peoples. And Tom, I know that you're in San Francisco, so we also respectfully acknowledge the Ramaytush Ohlone people, the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. And we also acknowledge that the entire Bay Area is the ancestral territory of the Miwok, Yokuts, and Patwin, as well as other Ohlone peoples. So collectively, we recognize that Indigenous communities have lived in these communities for generations, and we honor and recognize their ancestors, descendants, elders, and all members of these communities who have stewarded these regions for generations. So thank you for allowing me that moment of acknowledgement. And now I'd like to turn it over to Elif to say a few words of introduction.
Well, thank you, Greg. Thank you for the acknowledgements. Thanks for welcoming everybody, and thanks everyone for being here. Before we begin, as I have been doing with other workshops, I would like to provide a brief context about what is designing for empathy and why are we doing this. As I said, in my culture, as I said in yesterday's workshop, in my culture, we have this tradition, like if you say something 40 times, it happens. So I'm really hoping that if I repeat this designing for empathy message, bringing empathy to the world, maybe in, 2-3 work summits, we'll get this done, hopefully. So I would like to just share with you that our main goal with the designing for empathy workshops and summits is to create a platform where individuals from different backgrounds, disciplines, and sectors can come together to develop solutions to the empathy deficit in our world. We believe that our ability to develop individuals' capacity for empathy towards the oneness of all beings, all of humanity, the environment, and the planet lies at the heart of our ability to solve our most complex problems. The challenges we face today, from social injustice to climate change, are not because we lack the intellectual capacity, technologies, or the resources to tackle them, but it is because caring for others as much as we care for ourselves, as if that other could be me, which makes us want to take action to alleviate the suffering of the other, requires a major perspective shift. This is where we stop seeing ourselves as the centers of the universe and start recognizing that we are all interconnected parts of something much greater than ourselves. This pragmatic perspective shift can only be achieved through a lived experience. And empathy, our ability to imagine the world through another's perspective, provides the foundation. Something extraordinary happens when we empathize. Because of our inherent ability to empathize, our ego, which always puts I, me, myself in the front and center, gets distracted momentarily, while our true self, which is deeply rooted in our heart in the qualities of compassion and love, takes the helm of our attention and channels it and immerses it in another's perspective. This is not always easy because it requires us to look at the world in a whole new way. Instead of placing ourselves in the center of the universe, we realize that we are, and each being in this circle of oneness is unique and an essential component of our existence. This pragmatic perspective shift can only happen through an experience, and that's where designing for empathy comes in. We believe that because empathy can be best learned through lived experiences, creating those authentic experiences where individuals can discover, unlock, and advance their potential for empathy in safe and non-judgmental spaces become more essential. Designing for Empathy workshops are here to provide a platform for a diverse group of individuals to come together and experiment with the creation of these perspective shifting experiences that might lead to a spark of empathy on a journey towards a realization of the oneness of all beings. Thank you so much for being here. And Tom, I admire, I'm like maybe the topmost fan of your work and also the Exploratorium. I'm so grateful for your participation in this summit, as you have been in the past 4 years, and all the other workshops. Really looking forward to just immersing ourselves in your exercise. Would you like to say a few words to just introduce yourself, please? And then you can just please, feel free to lead us into the experience.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ali, for that wonderful introduction. And it's so inspiring. I mean, I'm thinking back to some of our earliest conversations and, of course, our trip to Dharamsala. And it's nice to see somebody from Dharamsala. Sarang, good to see you. It makes me want to be there again. Welcome, everybody. And thank you for attending this. I see some familiar faces and mostly people that I don't know. So it's an honor to be here with you. Well, let me first introduce myself a little bit. My title at the moment, my professional title is Creative Director for Global Collaborations at the Exploratorium in San Francisco. And even though I work at the San Francisco Exploratorium, I'm actually broadcasting here today from Coast Miwok land in Marin County, just north of San Francisco. So, and thank you, Greg, for that land acknowledgement. That was really special as well. I really appreciate that. So I think what I do, I don't need to say a whole lot about that. I'm happy to answer questions afterwards, but basically, I help the Exploratorium and the partners that we work with create exhibits and learning experiences of different sorts. I'm actually very interested in science education, but also the overlap between science and religion, actually, which is a sort of an unusual area and one that I like exploring a fair amount. So I think what I'll do is I'm just going to introduce the general arc of the session. I'm going to present a little bit about so we're going to start sort of more in the head. I'm going to present with just explaining a type of exhibit that we and others have developed called social inquiry exhibits. So these are exhibits that get people to interact with other people and to reflect on their own emotional interactions and their own social experiences, right? So we often think of exhibits that they're about physics, they're about light, they might be about history or something like that, but this is actually about social phenomena and personal experiences of those social phenomena. So I'll present about that. We can do some Q&A about that. And then we're going to change gears. And then we're going to do a much more experiential side of the workshop where we actually are going to do some exercises around people who are easy for us to identify, to empathize with, and people who are harder for us to empathize with. And the idea is to actually try to just sort of start a little bit of inquiry into why is it that certain, in this case, it's just going to be faces because it's just photographs. Why is it that certain faces are easy for us to empathize with and other ones are harder? And then we'll do a little exploratory around sort of probing the edges of that and what might it take to become a little bit easier to empathize with people who might be hard for us. And then we'll talk about that. So we're going to kind of transition from the more sort of reference-based presentation to then an experience and then sharing amongst us about the experience. So I encourage you, if you can, to be really here. You can turn your cameras on and off as you need to, but it's certainly great if you at least turn them on some of the time so that we can see your faces and feel like a little mini community for these next 2 hours. Okay, so I am going to start by sharing my screen. Let me go here. Okay, so keynote design. Why are there 2 of those? Should be that one there. Go there quickly. Okay. So do you all see my screen? Yep. Okay. So I'm going to go into the play mode. Okay. So social inquiry experiences. Exhibits in museums are often about things that are outside of ourselves. These are exhibits that actually bring things in a little bit more into the personal, or that's the idea at least. I'm going to give a brief orientation. I don't know how many of you know about the Exploratorium. We are a museum located on the waterfront in San Francisco. That's us with the boat parked in front of us. There, where we actually occupy 2 piers over the water in San Francisco. And we really built our reputation in many ways for physics exhibits, for exhibits that were about light, but not just light on its own, but light plus perception, right? So sound plus perception. It could be about motion plus the perception. So from the beginning, we were always interested not just in the object of learning, but also the act of perceiving and understanding that object. So we've always combined art and science quite a bit. This is our central gallery where we actually have a lot of experiences about light and optics and visual perception. We've also emerged over time where we're actually interested in not just phenomena that might be physical phenomena, but also social phenomena, phenomena that relate people to people. How do people behave and act and feel and think about each other? And if you pause and think about that for a moment, much of the world is caused by how people behave, act, and think about each other. Whether it's problems like traffic congestion and sort of who goes first, that's a behavioral thing. Whether it's big international negotiations, whether it's questions about how we tend or don't tend to our collective commons. How do we actually care for the world, for future generations, or even for our fellow neighbors? It's also how we use resources. How do we allocate water, food? How do we allocate resources of the state and our own personal generosity? So those behaviors are, of course, social behaviors that have a huge impact on the collective well-being of a society and on problems that we may choose to allow into our consciousness or not, like homelessness, or behaviors that we may choose to engage in or not, like collaboration with other people to achieve collective goals or not. So that's the general class of phenomena that we're talking about here. So at the Exploratorium for a number of years, we've been experimenting with this. The National Science Foundation funded us very generously to create an exhibition called The Science of Sharing. That was sort of one of our first forays into that, which I think is part of how Elif and I got connected. She came and saw those exhibits and then we started talking. We also did a project for those of you in Washington. It's just a few exhibits in the National Museum of American History. But again, they're exhibits that try to get people talking to each other about topics like democracy and immigration and topics like that. Then in 2019, we opened an exhibition about identity. It was called Self-Made, and it really tried to talk about different ways in which identities both create biases, allow us to create stereotypes, make it harder or easier to connect with certain people. And then finally, we opened a public space exhibition called Middle Ground right in front of the public library in San Francisco, which was again about, it was called Middle Ground. And the idea was to try to get people to think about the strangers that are walking by them in a public space. So I'm going to talk about each of these projects, but before I do that, I want to mention an article in an excellent book edited by Elif, which is actually called, the title is Designing for Empathy. Isn't that the title of the whole book? I'm trying to remember. Is that right, Elif? Yes, okay, good. Anyway,
Yes.
Yes. So myself and some colleagues, we wrote an article about this type of exhibit that I'm going to talk about, these social inquiry exhibits. So that's that's where we get a little more analytic. You can look at that article if you want to follow up on some aspects of these exhibit designs. So now for the specific projects, I mentioned the NSF-supported Science of Sharing. The subtitle was Investigating Competition, Cooperation, and Social Interaction. So this is actually a very important point. You know, we think a lot about positive human social interactions like cooperation, but I actually really deeply believe that the full range of human possibilities from cooperation to competition is in each of us. There's a line from Solzhenitsyn, I think, he says, I believe this is from him, saying that the line between good and evil passes through every individual human being. And I actually believe that to be true. And I also believe that even some things like competition evolved for reasons that were useful to humanity. So I think actually being able to actually embrace those and not, and most importantly, not communicate shame. So I love what Elif said earlier about a space that's free of shame and judgment, because frankly, at least I have plenty of competition and envy and other not so admirable qualities inside of myself. But if I can not approach those with shame, then I can engage with them more constructively and hopefully transform them into things like empathy and cooperation. So, okay, so we opened this exhibition. We had many different exhibits there. It really was grounded in the academic field of social psychology. We had exhibits where people could, choose what they wanted to give money to. We had a bowl at the entrance of the exhibition where you were invited to leave something and take something. The idea was, would you leave something valuable? I would every now and then go in there and leave $5 and sort of stand back and see what would happen. Would people take it right away? What would they do with it? Would they exchange something else? It was called the bowl of give and take. So we had straight up exhibits on cooperation. This was actually kind of a game. It was kind of like Pac-Man, only we had to change the name. But people had to play it together. One person could go up, the other person could go down, the other person could go right. So they had to cooperate together as to achieve their goals. We had an exhibit about something called the tragedy of the commons, called Sip or Squirt, where you decided whether another person would get a sip of water or a squirt in the face. So you could kind of trick them, but whatever you did also influenced the results that you got together. So it's a version of something that in social psychology, they call the tragedy of the commons. So it was a very kind of joyful way to experience it. Then there were straight up competition exhibits, right? The tragedy of the commons is an example of a social dilemma where you have to choose, am I going to collaborate or am I going to compete? This exhibit here was called Red versus Blue, and it was not about politics. It was just, there were two buttons and you could accumulate points for the red team or the blue team. And people loved it. People, to this day, people will not stop. They'll choose their teams, they'll make their teams, and then you just accumulate points. But here's the twist, what's very interesting is to see how you make teams with or against other people. So in this case here, I literally saw fathers pushing their children out of the way, becoming so competitive, right? But then forming teams with somebody who might not be their child because they were on the same team. So it was very, very interesting to see how people created teams. So one of the lessons for me of this is that I believe that we have evolved partially to collaborate, sometimes to compete. Think about team sports. You're collaborating very closely with one group of people in order to be able to compete with another group of people, right? Which unfortunately is also what war is, right? You have incredible collaboration with one group of people in order to then fight against another group of people. So the fun thing about this exhibit was that it didn't just stop with the competition. Every now and then it would just interrupt the game. And so people would have to stop for a second and it would ask them questions that would hopefully lead to reflection. How did you decide which team to join? How do you feel about the other team? How do you feel about whether you're ahead or behind? So that's some of the inquiry. So those are examples of the Science of Sharing exhibition. Another project, like we said, was in the National Museum of American History, and this was timed. There were new exhibitions opening right after the 2016 election. Actually, it opened in 2017, and the exhibitions were opening. They'd been planning for years about democracy and about immigration. So those were two rather charged topics in the United States at that time. The exhibits that we made for them were exhibits about American values. This is an exhibit based on a sports metaphor where you have teams that play against another team and then they progress. They're called brackets, as people sort of, there are sports events where the winning the winning team from one game then moves on to the next competition till you come up with a winner. But the question were questions like, who changed America more? Or which food is more American? So believe me, when you start talking about which food is more American, corn or hamburger, and where did hamburger come from? It came from the city of Hamburg, right? Where did corn came from? It was native to the Americas beforehand. So you get some very interesting conversations. And the whole point is there's not a right answer. The whole point of this exhibit is it gets people talking about values, and it helps people understand that there are different perspectives around values. And this is one place, by the way, this museum, school children from all over the United States come to this museum to actually interact. So you could not make assumptions about people's politics. This was another exhibit that got people talking about values. They would choose images to go with a certain word, like cooperation, like democracy. And then they would choose those images, and then they would reveal them to other people and have a conversation. So these are tricks that we found that work for all kinds of subjects. You can create image conversations about topics as strange as like savings or about, climate values. This is another exhibit we did for them, which was where do you stand? And it encouraged people, they had a little avatar on the screen, and you could move your avatar to one place to another. We actually did a version of this type of event in person, actually, at one of the Designing for Empathy summits, where you can ask a question. Voting should be mandatory, and people say, strongly disagree, strongly agree, not sure. And you arrange yourself on that spectrum, but then you have a conversation. So that's the whole point of these social inquiry exhibits. Another exhibition, which was specifically about identities and social identities, sort of how we take things that, used to be thought of as more biological, like, for example, race or even gender, that used to be thought that way, but actually that have incredible social constructs around them that actually enforce them and create meaning around those. So this exhibition was about exploring you in a world of we, how to sort of human social dynamics form certain social identities. So this exhibit featured a combination of art pieces as well as interactive experiences. The artwork that's on the back there is a piece by Angelica Das. She's a Brazilian artist, and she's traveled around the world and has this amazing database where she matches people's color on the tip of their nose with the Pantone color that corresponds to the color of their skin, and then just makes this growing display. And everywhere she displays it, she photographs people in the local context of just the huge variety of human skin colors. And when you start looking at this, and some exhibits encourage you to sort of put yourself in there and then take a picture of yourself as well, it really just gets you reflecting on sort of how many varieties of human skin tones there actually are. But there were lots of exhibits. There were exhibits where you could wear, you could digitally project different types of clothing onto yourself. You could actually try to cut things with left-handed scissors to think about how handedness creates identities. There were exhibits about sort of the difference between sort of facial expressions or facial attributes and actually skin color, and sort of how our perception changes around that. There were exhibits that got people to think about what kind of burden society had created for them based on everything from gender to religion to age to sexual orientation and sexual identities. We had an exhibit around where we encourage people to sort of think about how they think other people perceive them, but how they actually feel misperceived by others. And this is a great exercise where we've actually created a database again here of like how people think they might be perceived because I dress in a certain way. People think I might be this, but actually, in this case, I volunteer weekly and call attention to government abuses of the community. So it gets you thinking about how are my choices perceived by others, but how do they actually mask a different reality? Again, there's an online version of this, which this presentation will be shared with you. It's all in a folder. Everything from this presentation is in a folder, and it will be shared with you. And there are links to, for example, the website for an exhibition where you can actually engage in some of these activities yourself. So again, people would just fill out these questions. Because something about how you look, people think that, and then you fill it in, but actually. So you get very rich conversations as people fill this in for this exhibit. So here are some of the exhibits. So because I am a white passing, people think I'm white, but actually I'm native Californian. Okay, so those are just some examples. Because I'm standing and walking, people think I'm able-bodied, but actually I'm hella disabled, bruh. I love that one. Okay, so last project to highlight is an exhibition called Middle Ground. This is the one that opened in front of the library. This is when it opened. Unfortunately, it opened fairly soon before COVID, so it didn't stay open very long, but the National Science Foundation, which funded this, is funding a redo of this, and we're going to reinstall it in front of our museum and in some new locations as well. Here's the mayor of San Francisco opening the exhibition. It's right in front of City Hall, but it's also an area where there is a very big homelessness and drug addiction problem. So you have lawyers and politicians and tourists and unhoused people all in this space. So it really is a great sort of laboratory for how we perceive people with different social circumstances. We prototype these exhibits in public spaces around San Francisco. This is some of our prototyping process. Then we opened it, and this there are exhibits, for example, that make people hold hands to complete a circuit, and then it makes a song start happening. So it hopefully got strangers to interact with each other. There are exhibits like this one here that got people to work together towards something, but then also reflect on who's working harder. And sometimes when you're working on a project, maybe you might lay back a little bit and let others do the work. It's a phenomenon called social loafing. Again, something that we had a lot of fun with the visitors on site. Then exhibits where you could superimpose your face on somebody else's face, and you could sort of blend faces a little bit and then match your facial expression with somebody else. And then we also put out there, we just put a pay it forward cafe. This was a cafe where you could buy something for the next person in line. So the idea was to promote generosity and to actually have people just exercise generosity, which we know is associated with certain feelings. Very important aspect of this exhibition was the facilitation. So we had a group called Urban Alchemy, which is a group of formerly incarcerated individuals who actually come and they help facilitate. They are the stewards of this exhibition. They kind of help people understand how to engage in it. They help staff the cafe. And we've collaborated now with them on several projects and intend to keep collaborating. So that human facilitation, and especially by people who actually sort of might create some interesting dialogue about even their social circumstances, has been really integral to this project. So we're making new exhibits about money, about public spaces, about climate change using these social inquiry exhibits. So, okay, I'm gonna pause here for a moment. So we could give a whole presentation all about different ways of thinking about empathy. And that's not what I'm really here to do today. In fact, if I've put this slide up there, and if there are social psychologists in the room, they'll start arguing about it, right? So I think one of the key points to make is that even the word empathy is a construct. It's an intellectual construct around human behaviors, around human emotions, around human cognition. And there are many different ways to talk about it. And there are also, and one of the things that's interesting in social psychology is you can talk about it more cognitively, you can talk about it very emotionally. And there are such things as negative empathy, for example. They will talk about that. Personal distress, where you feel too much empathy. I mean, think about maybe your own partner. When your own partner is really upset with you, you often don't empathize with their anger, right? You feel that anger, but you might also be like, no, I want it to go away. I'm not going to empathize with you right now. But of course, you know, your relationship might be better if you could actually say, oh, wow, I hear that you're angry. But I'm just saying that too much empathy, we can sometimes reject it internally. And I want to a little bit complexify empathy, you know. There's how we do or don't interact and when we choose to feel empathy with others. Living in a city, you have many opportunities to feel empathy or not. And we all make choices about when we choose to feel that empathy or not. And I'm making that point simply because there's a lot of psychological studies on this. And again, no judgment or anything like that, but it's really important for us to realize that we actually spend a lot of our time protecting ourselves from excess empathy. I also want to make another point, which is that we all polarize. Look at this slide quickly and think about, like, who do you empathize with in this slide? Just quickly. Do you empathize with anybody in that picture? And if you do, what might that say about all of the cues that you're reading? If you live in America, this has a certain meaning to you, right? It might have a very different meaning in a different country. In the last 2 years, this has a certain meaning. There are people wearing uniforms, and there are all kinds of codes of who are these people and what do they mean. But the point I'm trying to make is that we empathize with some people more than we empathize with other people. And that's really what we're going to do some exercises around. But before I get to that, I also want to just say that there's a lot of debate even within psychological fields about, is empathy the same as compassion? Is it a necessary first step, but also somewhat different? Is it the same as love? Is it the same as loving kindness, which is a translation of what in certain Buddhist circles is called metta, for example? Is it part of design thinking? So that's a whole, there's an empathy stage in design thinking, right? But is that really empathy? Is that, or is that sort of a more functional exchange? Is it caring? Is it fantasy role playing? There's a whole body of research on that part of empathy. So again, I just want to say there's a debate about this. I don't think there are absolute answers, because I think the human psyche is more complex than any of these words could capture. So I'm going to stop sharing there, and I'm going to, well, just so you know, there's a page with some resources. These might be somewhat outdated, but they're interesting resources. And again, this is actually shared with you. Let's see, how do I stop? Can't seem to get my control. It's interesting. I can't quite seem to get my.
Maybe.
That worked. I got it. I got out. Okay, great. Okay, so we have a little bit of time right now just to see if there are any questions or answers. Well, I don't know if there are any answers until I go to the questions, but if there are any questions about this presentation. And again, reminding, this is a little bit more in the information space. We're going to try to drop down a little bit more into the personal perception and heart space a little bit later on.
Tom, thank you so much. And again, a good reminder for all of us that we may not have the answers here, but this is an opportunity to reflect and ask questions. I know, Lottie, in the chat box, when you were going through your exhibitions at the Exploratorium and the competition came, the blue and the red, Lottie points out that those are associated with political parties. And, you know, did that have any influence on the design of this experience?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. We went so back and forth, right? Because colors have meanings, right? Every culture. We're doing a version of this exhibit right now in Brazil, right? And red versus blue means something different there. And we talked for a while, for a while they said, oh, it should be black versus white. And we're like, no. That gets complicated in all kinds of different ways. So we opened this exhibition in 2014, and I would say that was not as polarized a political time as it became later on. I think we were aware that there were resonances. I would say that people just choose a team. It has very little to do. If there's an open red button, people will grab that red button. There's no question about that. I do think nowadays it poses some questions, and if we did it in different parts, and for those of you who may not be from the United States, by the way, blue is associated with one political party and red is associated with another political party. And so, for example, when you see maps during elections, they show up in blue versus red. So it can be a very emotionally, especially after polarized elections. But we're kind of trying to get at polarization. So we kind of played with that a little bit. I'm not sure if we would choose it, purple versus yellow. Each one of these, there are gender associations with colors. It's fascinating, actually, right? I mean, that just reminds you how deep identities go, right? And how how often completely arbitrary they are, right? I mean, look at portraits of upper class men in the 17th century with their wonderful wigs. You know, that's just a completely different set of social status cues than we would do today. I'm just saying it's those arbitrary qualities come to mean a lot through social construction.
Thanks, Tom. And of course, we invite any of you in the audience, if you have something you'd like to say. I know many of you have been in our workshops before. So any thoughts come to your mind? Paul, anything that you're thinking about right now?
It's also fine we've got plenty more to go over. So if more conversation questions come, oh, Elif, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I just love this type of conversation, and from what I have been learning on this journey, I think it is becoming clear, and this is more about your one of the last slides that you showed. You know, what is empathy? Is it love? Is it kindness? Is it just role play? You know, or something like that? I cannot remember exactly, but I think it is so important that, you know, that there needs to be a realization and acceptance, really, that, you know, how we define empathy and how we give meaning to what empathy is has a lot to do with our culture and the way we grew up and our worldview. And some cultures may not even have a word for empathy because they are so sophisticated in our understanding of, you know, our connections, you know, a human's connections to the universe, not only the planet, but the universe. They might just totally skip that stage and not really like, oh, is it another step in, you know, like kindness? Does compassion come first? And this is also like the way I think most, I'm just going to generalize this, I apologize, but like most like Western minds think, and just make everything very linear, and there has to be a hierarchy and steps and numbers and a value, as if, you know, if empathy is only a step in compassion, then compassion is surely just much better than empathy. But some people might think that it can lead to compassion or whatever, you know. So it just, I think it is really important that there needs to be, I think, more discussion about that, and including diverse perspectives about, you know, different cultures. And I see my colleagues from Philip's collection, Aparna Sadananda, is here, and she's going to facilitate a workshop after this one in the afternoon. And in our planning calls, you know, we had a very deep and meaningful discussion about, you know, what empathy is. And please, you know, I don't want to misstate anything, but, you know, how is it perceived in yoga, and what is the ultimate goal of this mindfulness and building connections? And so I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I think Allison has a question. Allison, please.
Hi, yeah. Hi, Tom. I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you. I'm a social psychologist here, and I did really appreciate your subtle, your really nuanced discussion of the different parts of empathy. And I wanted to sort of bring it back to the title of today's workshop, which was really drew me in, about easy and difficult empathy. And I wondered if you wanted to talk at all about whether you consider those sort of different parts of empathy to be easier or harder.
It's wow. Well, okay, so that's really going to lead into the conversation or the activities that we're going to do later on. And so I mean, I became interested in loving kindness practices in Buddhism around starting with an easy object for your loving kindness. Some exercises start with yourself, but then you start with a teacher or a benefactor, somebody who was very easy for you to actually feel empathy towards. And then you progress with, you know, to people who are progressively maybe more either distant or harder ultimately. And then ultimately you want to have it for all of humankind, right? So I think it's really deep. And for me, the practice to this day of choosing choosing somebody who I do not instinctively feel empathy for and trying to contemplate them with empathy and even compassion is a very meaningful practice. And it's one that feels like it connects me with humanity rather than divides me. So I'm not really answering your question, but I would love to know if social psychologists have studied that. And of course, there is such a practice around this metta practice, the loving kindness practices in Buddhism. That would be interesting. There'd be plenty of people that one could study around that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I hadn't thought of, I'm sort of coming from a background of so the distinction you made between emotional and cognitive empathy, with emotional perhaps being easier, although that's a big word here, and using less of your mental resources perhaps, and cognitive perhaps requiring more of that sort of deliberate thinking. But it's really interesting to hear you talk about thinking a bit more as easy or difficult towards the target, because that sort of comes at it from a different angle, and even the emotional empathy is more difficult to people, or doesn't happen to people we consider dissimilar from ourselves. So thank you so much for bringing that up, Tom. I really appreciate it.
Yep. Cool.
Thanks, Allison. And Rehana, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. You had your hand raised.
Yes, yeah, Rehana, that's, yep. Hi, Tom, good to see you.
Hi,
Great presentation. I loved it. I really want to learn about a lot of the other activities and stuff. So I do workshops on empathy and science communication, especially when we talk about controversial science topics. But one of the workshops was around the same time when with the murder of George Floyd. And it was like a very weird time to talk about empathy. So something that we did in the beginning was to say what empathy is not. So I appreciated you talking about what empathy might be. I'm also curious to hear what it is not. So some of the things we were talking about is, it's not asking for accountability. It doesn't mean not being angry at someone. It doesn't mean we necessarily have to like forgive someone. It's more about like that curiosity and like the mindset of like listening and asking questions and digging into the why and everything. So I guess I'm kind of curious to hear what might be misperceptions. I know there is not like a definite like the description of what it is, but what you think it's not that people might think it has to be.
I mean, to me, this gets into some very interesting, also spiritual territory around acceptance. So I personally believe that acceptance is a really big part of being well in the world. But there are huge debates around, does acceptance mean that you tolerate, social injustice? Does it mean that you tolerate, violent racism? And in fact, I believe, but this is the trick, right? And people could challenge this. I believe that if you actually really accept something, you're in a better position to enter into a dialogue or potentially even oppose it, right? That, I have debates, I'm in San Francisco, I'm very liberal. I have debates with a lot of my colleagues about how they use certain political terms to describe the other, and how we otherize, what is roughly half of America in our political discourse. And I believe if we can de-otherize them a little bit, first of all, we might have a better conversation with them. We might increase the likelihood that they feel empathy for some of the causes and beliefs that we have. But that's about changing them. I also believe that, again, that line through good and evil, I think, passes through everybody, but that does not for a second. I actually think social action is very, very compatible with a deep acceptance of humanity's flaws, and also with really looking clearly in the face of what, I don't know how else to describe, but evil.
Thank you, Tom. And then Dwayne, I believe you've had your hand raised for a bit. Thanks so much for your patience and for joining us.
Excuse me. Yes, there's so many things that I would like to engage on. And so I'm going to focus on a couple things. It's interesting for me because I'm retired and my focus is on volunteer work. but I find these types of conversations really interesting. And, you know, one of the things actually that was really challenging for me was actually the title of this conversation. And in graduate school, I studied language and behavior and looked at how words and symbols influence behavior. And my interest is in how I can use language as a tool to create a different life experience for myself and the people that I come in contact with. And so it was interesting for me that you chose difficult and not challenging. And for me, when I approach something like, you know, when in this kind of a conversation, difficult takes me in a different direction than challenging. And I will leave it there, but there's all kinds of things I would love to engage on. And I find this a really interesting conversation. And I want to thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation.
I mean, that is, thank you for saying that, because frankly, like, you know, these words, they all take you in different directions, right? So, I mean, I think that's really good, you know, hard, difficult, challenging, right? I mean, those are really interesting. I think I've used the word hard. Is hard more problematic? That's actually great suggestion. And because ultimately challenging invites me into it a little bit better, which is maybe what I'm hearing you say.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think let's transition now to a little bit of an experiential piece. So by the way, we're going to start with a bit of a technological challenge. So like, everybody take a deep breath. We're going to this might be easy for some, but if you want to stretch out for a moment, just like acknowledge your body before we go into tech land for a second. And the only reason we're going into tech land is to allow us to just do this activity together. We would do it physically if we were all in the same place, but you know, we get to have guests from afar through the digital means. So, okay. So let me see. I'm going to do some sharing. So first of all, let me, Greg, do you want to share the two links to the two decks? Can you do that and put that in the chat?
I will. Give me a moment and I will do that on my end while you're doing your magic on your end.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is, so I'm going to share two decks. The word deck means like presentation. So I'm just going to share two presentations with you. One of the presentations has a whole bunch of images. And these images are not exactly chosen random. In fact, I would welcome feedback if you feel like I under or overrepresented a certain identity in the selections that I included. But I tried to make it fairly diverse. I'm sure internationally it's not so diverse, but whatever. Apologize for that. So one of the decks will just have a whole bunch of images in it. And then what you're going to do, you should be able to access those presentations. And once you access the presentation, you should be able to copy images from the source presentation and then put them in and choose which one is easy, which one is neutral, and which one is challenging for you. I'll use the word challenging, right? So the idea is that you want to look at all these images and you want to choose an image of a face. That's all you get. But some of the faces, you know, some of them are celebrities, so you'll recognize them. Some of them are not. So you'll just be reacting to whatever context you see there and whatever facial expression you see there. So let me see, okay, so the documents are in here. So the source images. So let's for a second and let's see, I'm gonna, Greg, can you unspotlight me for a second, just because I want to, or I guess I can do that. Well, here, I'll just change the view. So I'm back in gallery. Okay. Yeah. So I'd like you to open both of those decks. And first of all, I want to know whether anybody can't open the deck. That's the first thing to do. You should be able to click on the link and it should open for you, but sometimes people have problems with Google. And by the way, it's okay. We have a backup if you have a problem with Google. So I guess maybe if you can raise your hand if you've been able to open the decks. Yeah. Okay. So I'm not seeing anybody who, let's put it this way. Speak up if you haven't been able to. Has anybody not been able to open the two decks?
There's something in the chat saying Lottie may be having difficulty.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, sorry, I can't open it either.
Okay, all right. So is there anybody else? I'm sorry, Lottie Kent, and who was the other person? I think it's just Lottie. Lotte. I don't know how you pronounce your name. So
Lottie, are you at your computer or on your phone?
I'm at my computer. I usually can open all these things, but today I'm just having a lot of trouble tech-wise.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
I'll send it to you in an email, Lottie.
Thanks.
Yep. So let's try that. And then also, Lottie, we have another way to work this, which is that we can stay on while people go into the exercise room and just do it on their own computers. I can basically stay with you and help you make the choices. So we can go through that. And so I can sort of be an extension. So, okay. So here's what we want you to do. We want you to choose your 3 images, then copy the images and transfer them into the other deck. What you have to do is you have to claim a section of the other deck. So in the other deck, it says X's choices or something like that. Let me go into it and just remind myself, right? Okay. So I'm going to share my screen for a second here. Stop. Okay. Okay. So there you go. So I see Allison Jane's already claimed a section. Aparna's claimed a section. So you could go down to where there's an X, or even if I think there are enough X's here for everybody in here. You just claim your name, put your name in there. And if it looks like every section is taken, just copy somebody else's section and then put your name in there. Okay. And you copy the images in there. And the idea is that you want to choose an image, an easy image, a neutral image, one that you wouldn't, neutral image might be one that you just don't feel very strongly easy to empathize or hard to empathize. You don't feel sort of a very strong positive or negative valence. And then I use the word hard here, not difficult, right? But that could be challenging. And then hard empathy images, right? So you want to make those choices. Okay. So let me stop sharing here. Go back to everybody. Okay. Are there any questions about the exercise? Because I'm going to let you be alone, because this is like, I want you to take a little bit of time and actually really just look at those faces and sort of see what happens to you, right? Okay. Are there any questions about it? And Lotte, if you hang with us, we can help you make the choices if you haven't been able to access it differently. Yes, Aparna.
Do you want us to do this to all of the 50 images that are there? No, just like 3 or
just choose one for each of the 3 categories, right?
Okay, gotcha.
Now, if you have a really difficult time, or if you're just saying, wow, I'm feeling like a lot of empathy for these 2 or 4 images, put all 4 of them on your page if you want. You can just resize them and put them on there. It's fine if you want to put more than 1, but it is powerful to just choose one, and you can just make a new page if you want to put an extra one in there if you really can't choose. All right.
Thank you.
Is that clear to everybody? I think so. Okay. And
Saren, did you have a question?
Oh, Saren, I think your hand is up from before, saying that you were able to open the decks. Is that right? Or do you have a question? Okay. Okay, so you're good. Okay, yeah, so what we're going to do is let's see, it's 8:58 now. I'm going to give you 5 more minutes because I think a lot of you have already been doing this. So we're going to go till 9:05. And then what I would invite you to do is you can either stay on screen or even just go ahead and turn your camera off if you want. We'll be talking here, so you can turn your mic off if you want, and we'll send you a chat when we're ready to all come back into the same room. But just stay in Zoom, but turn your mic off if you don't want to hear us helping out with Lotte. Okay, all right.
All right, Tom, we are back live and recording again.
Excellent. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go over here to my outline to just remind myself what I was going to do here. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so let's see, where are we at? We're a little behind there. Why don't we just take a moment just to sort of stretch. If anybody needs a bio break, why don't we just take a 5-minute If any of you, I recommend like not checking your email, because the next thing we're going to do is going to be more meditative. But if you have to, you can do that. But definitely go to your take care of yourself for 5 minutes, and we'll be back at 9:10. Okay. Cool. Hello again. Oh, nice to see some family members there. Excellent.
It's lunchtime in here, Tom.
Excellent. That's good. That's good. I think, some kids I'm noticing are actually really enjoying Zoom, because they get to say hi to all these faces around the world.
Yeah. Want to say a quick hi?
Hi. Truck.
A truck went by. All right.
Oh, a truck. Oh, well.
No.
Okay. So next, what we're going to do is, this is a part that I've tried less around this exercise, but what I want to do is I want to actually, I'd like each of you to experiment with essentially going through, starting with your easy person, and basically feeling kindness towards that person, wishing them well. Okay, so this is kind of riffing off of a loving kindness meditation practice, right? So, and again, empathy is slightly different. Again, depending how you want to define it, empathy is not necessarily loving kindness, well wishing for somebody, but I do think that they're quite connected. But in this case, I'm going to sort of build on a fairly traditional loving kindness meditation practice. So the idea is that what you would do is that you will turn off your screen and go to your section where your images are. Now, Lotte, I think what we can do for you is we can just put your images up on the screen, I guess. Maybe that's the best way to do it, so that you can see that. And the goal is that you will actually take your time and go through at least 2 of the faces. And there are different phrases that people can use. The idea is that you just want to wish this person well. You want to wish, you can say a phrase like, may you be happy, may you be well, may you be safe, and may you be in peace, may you experience peace. So that's a fairly simple way to just simply wish them well. And I'd like you to do it while looking at the picture of the easy person. Let's start there, okay? So then, if you're comfortable, move on to the neutral person. And if you are comfortable, but this is the hard part, okay? Only if you think you're comfortable, see what happens with the difficult person, with wishing them well, and just see what your experience is of that. It's also, the hard person could be potentially very difficult in a way, or challenging in a way that is not probably healthy for you to try to do this right away. So you're going to have to judge like where you want to go with that, but at least flash that picture on there. And if what you have is kind of like, I don't want to deal with it, notice that, and maybe go back to the neutral person for a while, or just notice that. So the whole goal of this is to notice what happens when you do this. So I'm not going to talk you through when to transition from the easy person to the neutral person to the hard person. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to do this. And then we're going to come back, and then we're going to actually just have some conversation. I mean, it's even a little less than 10 minutes. So it's going to probably be about like actually 2 minutes per person. So it's going to be about 6 minutes. So I think, again, it's probably a good idea to just, let's come back at 6:20, I'm sorry, at 9:22. All right. So in 6 or 7 minutes. And Lotte, I'm going to try to put the images up, and you're going to have to tell me which one you want to see. and you don't have to say the phrases out loud. And again, the phrases are, may you be well. You can say, may you be filled with love. May you be happy. May you be safe. And may you be at peace. So, okay, I'm going to share my screen. Buddy. Okay, it looks like people have been finishing up their exercises. We'll take a minute or so just to let people, not even a minute, but just to let everybody come back. So Greg, what we want to do next is we want to do breakout rooms. So let's see, let's do some quick math. How many, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Looks like we got 12 people. So maybe 3 rooms of 4 each. And if you just want to randomly make them, and then you and I can go between them. Does that work?
Sure. And Tom, how long do you want these breakout rooms to go?
Yeah. Okay. So let me look at the time that we have. So basically, it's basically all conversation. I think, why don't you give them a full, let's do 15 minutes. 15 minutes
Okay.
conversation. Okay. So the prompt for the conversation. So I'm just going to give you some, and I'll put them in the chat as well, but it'll take me a moment to copy them. So you'll be in a room with 3 other people. I may be coming in, and Greg may also be coming in at certain moments. But the prompts are to just share about the experience. What did you notice? That's really what matters the most. Like, what did you notice in choosing? What did you notice in going through the very abbreviated Zoom loving kindness exercise? But some other questions you might consider. Hang on a second, let me get here. Okay.
And Tom, do you want 4 rooms or 3 rooms? Sorry.
I think 4 rooms of, I'm sorry, 3 rooms of 4 people, I think is probably a better number. I think that's, well, no, actually, no. If you make 4 rooms of 3, that's better. That's more time for each person to talk. Sorry about that.
Okay. No,
okay.
That's all good.
No, okay. So here's some questions. What do you notice about why you made your choices? How does your personal history and identity influence your choices? What happened when you tried to do the love and kindness meditations? What similarities and differences between loving kindness and different types of empathy? So again, there's a difference between wishing well for somebody and feeling empathy for them. So just sort of like, did you notice any difference between those? So I'll copy those and put those into the chat. And we'll come back. Why don't we just come back at 9:40?
All right. So folks, give me 1 moment and I'll get you going. All right. Welcome back, everybody. And Tom, we'll turn it back to you.
Cool. Well, I mean, so this is open discussion time where I'm going to say 5 minutes at the end for just a little closing activity. There's more information that I can present about sort of intersectional identities and sort of all the different ways that identities get constructed. But frankly, I think it's going to be more interesting to just hear from you all. There were a lot of conversations that seemed really interesting. I'd love to just have them continue as a whole large group. So I don't know who wants to wander into it. I know we have a social psychologist in the room, and I was just in the room with them and sort of curious, just curious sort of how this sits, with what they might be researching or thinking about, just to start off the conversation.
Yeah, sure. So we started having a great conversation about how we had attempted to empathize with people that sort of didn't come naturally to us, and talked about how I think all of us separately had been sort of constructing these little background stories to these people to sort of make it easier for us to empathize with them. So for example, my neutral picture was a woman. It looked like it was her headshot. So I was sort of constructing the story in my head. Maybe she's on the job market. Maybe she's struggling to find work. Like to create the story that I could empathize with. And we then sort of transitioned into talking about how we're constructing these stories and how they are kind of based on stereotypes. I mean, we have so much limited information from these pictures, age, roughly, gender, maybe, and race, perhaps, are a few things that we're sort of basing these stories on. So we sort of then were getting into discussions about the sort of when it's okay to do that, and maybe it's not okay to do that. And I sort of started mentioning, I think this is when you came in, Tom, that there's a lot of research to suggest that when we empathize with people, it reduces our stereotyping. But sort of, I was then thinking about, if we're using our stereotypes to empathize, maybe it only really works when we have some information about the person and we're not just empathizing just from a photograph. I don't know if the other folks in the room want to jump in on that.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I couldn't tell who that was.
Oh, no, that was just me saying I didn't know whether the other folks in my room wanted to jump in on that.
Sure. Yeah. I think one of the things that I was thinking about and how I chose the pictures as well, like I didn't choose any of the pictures of people that I know or any like public figures. And I think when I was doing that, I was thinking that it was easier for me to empathize with people that I have information about. Even if I don't agree with them, I can kind of see where they're coming from, what their perspective is. So I think that was an interesting thing in my choices, just that I found it harder to empathize with people that or a person that I can relate to or that I cannot relate to stereotypically. And then when we were doing the exercise, I found that I was able to tell them those things, but I kept on kind of adding like an asterisk to it in my mind of like I hope you find happiness as long as it's not like affecting other people negatively and like things like that. I kept on kind of wanting to add things to it, but yeah, that's my experience.
For me, one of the things that's really challenging for me is when I'm in a conversation and, again, I'm listening to language and words and things. And so this type of exercise is really interesting because, when I think about perception and this idea of misperception, when I think about human flaws and being human, it's interesting because when I'm not sure that there's this idea of misperception. I think human beings have perception and we subjectively color those perceptions, that I subjectively color those perceptions. And looking at them in terms of misperception is an interesting idea for me. The person who I chose to be really challenging to look at, to share empathy with or extend empathy to was the Dalai Lama. Mm. And the reason why it was challenging for me is that this idea of this intersection between religion and money. And I saw a documentary where he engaged in a conversation where he was willing to endorse this cult-like leader as being a high-level spiritual being in exchange for money. And it just, that was really challenging. It was really challenging for me, even, during the exercise, to extend empathy towards him. Because of, for me, the hypocrisy that exists between money and religion and religious leaders.
One of the things that's so interesting to me is, Allison's point about like when we have information about somebody or not, versus when we're stereotyping somebody that we don't know. But the fact is, like when I think of people at work who I'm having a conflict with, I still have a story about them, right? Like I don't think we ever have the whole picture about somebody, like, or my partner. When I may be sort of having a challenging moment with them and not, I have a story, I have a stereotype often, right? So those stereotypes still operate sometimes. Yes, we're, interacting with strangers, interacting with people in a store, a lot of casual experiences. Of course, stereotypes are operative there, but I think it could be deeper than that. And I guess what I'm saying is those stories. So for example, with you, Dwayne, that story that you heard, which I've never heard, is really interesting. That then creates a construct that then makes it complicated to empathize with that person. So interesting. Anybody else? What did you find, including like whether like, oh, that didn't work for me? I was just like, I didn't want to go there.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I hope you can hear me through this mask. I found that working with images of people is very, very different for me than working with a human. I found that I had less empathy for a picture, particularly the less empathetic one. And I recall that a couple of weeks ago in DC, there was a march for women's choice. And at that march, which I attended, I crossed the line and spoke with one of the people who was in opposition in front of the Supreme Court. And I have no trouble with that. I have no trouble with being empathetic and hearing them and having like a really rich conversation, even though I vehemently oppose what they're standing for. But with these pictures, I guess it was like this kind of disembodied thing. And so I got to like be really angry at the person who I made up a story about. And so I just noticed that that was a different, the format made me react differently, or maybe it's because of this kind of contrived situation or something like that, which is valuable, absolutely. But I just noticed that about my own experience. I really appreciate this.
Well, and it makes you think about, I mean, we talk about Facebook, but is it just Facebook or media? I mean, magazines like we're creating worlds of friends and enemies, you know, every time we just look at a news feed, right?
And for me, like, not just this activity, but this entire workshop, it's just reminding me of all the reality shows that are like so popular on television these days, and how the participants in these shows, you know, try to play with this factor of, you know, empathy and, you know, to get certain gains out of it, perhaps. So it just makes me even more aware of my own spontaneous reactions to what happens when I see something, whether it's staged or not.
Do any of you feel, yeah, do any of you, have any of you found an edge that you're interested in exploring more? I mean, I've heard that a little bit in what you said, you were saying, Duane, that there's some edges at one point when you were talking about edges that feel fruitful to explore, but I see Elif's hand is up.
Yeah, I think, you know, something that I haven't noticed before, you know, and I've done, you know, with Tom, this exercise several times, you know, in different contexts, but the hard empathy choice was, I think, Mitch McConnell, but I didn't really choose him because of his, I mean, real personality as his name, as an individual, but I think it just, that image represented to me this person with greed and, you know, hungry for power, this unmitigated hunger for power and possession of power. And I was thinking, you know, when I was doing the meditation, and normally like this is something, these qualities, like I would never want to even be in the same room with, you know, like let alone just try to empathize with or anything, you know, it is just to me, they're just terrible, you know, and but then I found, you know, going through the prompts, immediately I felt this softening when I said, you know, may you be at peace. May you be filled with love. And I was genuinely wishing for him. But not because, you know, first of all, I thought, you know, maybe it is because I thought that because he's a person in power and maybe he's the way he is, he may need more love and peace because maybe he never felt those in his life. And her, you know, I'm speaking in general. And so maybe he could use that. Like he could really, he is the one who really needs those qualities, because like he's just missing them so much, as we can see from his choices and actions. But then I thought, like, is it because I was empathizing with him? Like, did empathy get me there to this, like, okay, like you also deserve love and peace. Like, how did I get there? It didn't come from this sort of linear step-by-step approach from empathy. But then, so that's the edge I think I will explore a little further, I mean, in my own time. Like, how did I get there? And when I thought later, it may also be because that maybe I was empathizing for the people who are being oppressed under this power. And by, generating this love and peace to this individual who holds power with the hopes that, he or she might change and all of a sudden, like, become a different person, and by helping, so that like the change, the transformation of him could be beneficial to others and the environment. And that, on the third leg of this sort of thinking, is why do I care about the people under his power or like directly affected by his choices? And then actually it brought back to me to empathy, the way I see empathy within the context of oneness, that what goes around comes around, and we are all one. And it is like we are a part. Humanity is like a single body. If the finger hurts, actually you also feel it, and your day goes bad just because of it, even if it's just your nail is bothering you a little bit. So it was very quick when I said, may you be at peace and love. But then the more I thought about it, these are the sort of the steps that I came across, and I would love to explore a little further. Thank you.
And just adding to what Elif said, my thoughts were similar. And then I noticed that for people who are hard to empathize with, like I had chosen Donald Trump, and my blessed, loving kindness wish was like, may you be blessed with the experience of peace. Because I somehow felt that, when you're not in alignment with, and in harmony, it's hard to experience peace in its deeper sense. You might superficially look, happy and everything seems fine, but deeper than it's hard to experience peace, and you're so out of alignment.
Yeah.
And if I could just also add to Aparna's piece, I also chose Donald Trump for various reasons as my difficult person to empathize with. And I said something similar to that, but I also said, which I didn't know if I really believed, so it was difficult. I wish for you to change. I wish for you to get better, things of that nature. And so going into the activity, I didn't know how I would feel about all of it. And I appreciate the space that you created, Tom. Thank you. But it just leaves me with, how can I find empathy for those difficult people? And walking into this experience, I was like, I'm sure that I'll find some difficulty, but it won't be like super hard. And in my group, I talked with my, group members about how a lot of these faces in this PowerPoint are people that I'm sure we can almost recognize walking down the street seeing. And, I was trying to reflect back on if, I gave any of them a second glance, if I offered some kind of empathetic thought towards them. And I can say more often than not, I didn't. I was just paying attention to what I was doing, where I was going. So what this has brought about is just how can I be more empathetic, to people that I can, neutral people. And then how can I be more empathetic to people that I might, based on because I can't change my identity. I can't change who I am and what personal biases I bring to the table. And I can't change necessarily who they are. So then what? What do I do then? So that's what I've been kind of ruminating on.
I want to jump in and be mindful of our time, and we can stay on for a few more moments to address Dwayne. I know you have a comment, and Sering, you also have something to share. But as we're closing up our program, just to ask you all, if you would please, to provide some feedback on this workshop. I dropped the link to our workshop survey into the chat box. So please tell us a few comments about it before we officially close up. And then also to remind you that we have another wonderful workshop with Aparna this afternoon at 3 o'clock on using art to help us think about meditation and empathy. So please join us for that. Dwayne, you have something you want to share here?
Yes, one of the things that's always interesting for me in engaging these conversations about empathy is self-esteem, how I show up, the work that I do before I enter a conversation. And I believe that's one of the areas, or to use Tom's word, edges that really I would like to see more exploration of, because, self-esteem shapes how I view my self-esteem, my sense of self shapes how I view the world and my perceptions of everything. And so for me to have a conversation about these things and not have a self-esteem component is really challenging for me. And in the conversations, we can learn a lot about where we are and also about other people simply in how they communicate about these experiences. And so I really think that component of self-esteem, self-awareness, how we show up is really an important addition to these conversations about empathy.
Right. And may I just add one note here? Dwayne, that's exactly the theme of my workshop this afternoon. It is to know the others by knowing the self, and how yoga, provides us, and art provides us so many approaches to explore this path towards becoming more empathetic. So if that resonates with any of you, you're all invited to that workshop. And thank you so much for this workshop, Tom, Greg, and Elif.
Sering, do you want to take us out?
Yeah, okay. I just want to say a little bit about the, the activity that we have done, that by choosing the images, how we feel like easy and neutral, hard to empathy someone. So for me, to choosing by choosing the image, I can say kind of to empathize to someone, and the compassion is something very much related with together, something goes together. So if most of the people try to say, if someone is very hard to empathy, then they will easily avoid that person. So to avoid that person, to empathize, I think if oneself has enough practice regarding the compassion and all these things, then at least we should have choose that instead of avoiding, choose that someone whom you feel like difficult to empathy for, and empathize to someone. So, and then since you are well known about, well practicing a practice regarding the compassion thing, so you can just deal with that person to whom you feel like difficult to empathize for. And then since you are aware of compassion and all these things, so you can easily convince that that person, and you can maybe, who knows, you can change that person's kind of or maybe kind of the angry face, or maybe aggressiveness and all these things. And then the result will be you can convince that person, and then you can change even that person to and then you can make that person with a smiley face again. And then so through that we have to think about so I think that empathize to someone something aggressive, and to have with oneself, to have familiar with the compassionate thinkings. So very much important, and something I felt. So I just want to share over here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this workshop. by the way.
Thank you so
Well,
much, Sarang.
Yeah.
We should wrap up. I just want to say a couple of things. I did put in the chat the link to the folder where all the presentations and even the outline of the session are. So please, repeat it, modify it, hack it, change it. Everything's open access. I also just want to say, this is touching material. If anything hard came up, I hope you honor that, and I hope. I also hope if in any way inadvertently I offended anybody, please forgive me. And I really appreciate all of your participation. And we're ending late, but just a moment of look at the screens on Zoom. If you're ever in a meeting and you're having a hard time, you can practice loving kindness for every face in that grid. And it's kind of a wonderful way to sort of change your day. So just keep that in mind. And thank you all very much.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you for your participation. Hopefully we will see you a little bit later this afternoon. Have a good afternoon.